President Trump is expected to announce billions of dollars in aid for the nation's farmers. Many are in financial crisis despite harvesting one of the largest crops in history.
Trade deal with China. Although the deal is not finalized, one of the big takeaways was that China was agreeing to buying a large amount of American soybeans.
U.S. soybean exports to China have ground to a halt in the last months after Beijing imposed a 44% tariff on the foodstuff and began to buy them from other countries.
China's already bought most of their crop for the year, so why would they buy a whole bunch more from us and have...
Beijing just moved to suspend some retaliatory tariffs on U.S. farm goods, but kept a 13% tariff on American soybeans. That number is everything. It's the difference between deal momentum and still too expensive. It's the fine print that decides whose ships get loaded this winter, America's or Brazil's. Investors cheered when Donald Trump met Xi Jinping in South Korea last week, easing fears that negotiations were collapsing. Beijing has now confirmed it will scrap duties of up to 15% on some U.S. agricultural imports from November 10th. Relief? Yes. Resolution? Not quite. Because on soybeans, the lifeblood of farm states, feedlots, and global protein supply, the cost barrier remains. A 13% tariff that keeps U.S. cargoes uncompetitive against Brazilian beans. Let's be precise. China's tariff commission under the State Council will lift certain retaliatory duties while leaving in place the 10% levies that Beijing imposed in response to Trump's Liberation Day tariffs, and crucially, a 13% effective tariff burden on U.S. soybeans. Analysts in Beijing call the suspension a great sign, in the words of Trivium China's Even Rogers Pay. It shows they're aligned and the agreement is likely to hold up. Markets hear that and breathe. But traders look at spreadsheets, not statements. Right now, Brazilian soybeans for December shipment are quoted at a premium of roughly $2.25 to $2.30 over the January Chicago contract. Comparable U.S. Gulf offers around $2.40 a bushel before you even factor in that lingering Chinese tariff. Do the math from a crushing plant's perspective. Brazilian origin is still the cheaper feedstock for China's massive soy meal and soybean oil demand. One international trader puts it bluntly, we don't expect any demand from China to return to the US market with this change. In other words, not yet. This isn't abstract. China is the world's biggest soybean buyer. In 2016, the year before Trump's first term, about 41% of China's soybean imports came from the United States. In 2024, that share slid to roughly 20%. That's not a blip, that's a supply chain rewiring. And this autumn, Chinese buyers largely walked past America's harvest because tariffs made U.S. beans too expensive. The cost to American farmers, billions in foregone exports and a thinner basis at the elevator. Then there's the politics. After the leaders' meeting, the White House said China would purchase at least 12 million metric tons of U.S. soybeans in the final 2 months of 2025 and at least 25 million tons in each of the next 3 years. Big figures, but Beijing hasn't confirmed those numbers. Traders are watching for the only thing that counts: tenders, bookings, and lineups. Until then, it's talk versus tonnage. Under the surface, two clocks are ticking. One is diplomatic. The visible easing, the language of mutual progress. China also announced it would suspend for 1 year the 24% additional tariffs it imposed on U.S. goods in April and roll back some non-tariff retaliatory measures, including export controls on certain U.S. entities. That reduces friction at the margins. The second clock is commercial, based, freight, crush margins, and price spreads that steer ships. And that second clock says Brazil still wins the tender more often than not. Yes, state trader COFCO did step in ahead of the summit, taking some fresh crop U.S. beans. That signaled intent. It also gave negotiators a talking point. But outside state-directed purchases, private crushers have to answer to spreadsheets. If Santos plus freight plus premium beats Gulf plus tariff plus freight, the decision is already made before politics enters the room. China's senior trade negotiator Li Chenggang framed the volatility as a response to U.S. tariffs. Agricultural trade between the two countries, he said, has seen fluctuations, and he urged Washington to help create favorable conditions for cooperation. Translate the diplomat speak. Remove cost barriers, and the flows normalize. Leave them in place, and Brazil remains the default supplier. Here's the deeper story. In a tariff war, even partial ceasefires can lock in new routes. Crushing plants tweak contracts, ports upgrade to handle different origins, traders hedge different bases, and habits form. You can suspend a levy in a press release, you can't reset a global supply chain overnight. And Brazil isn't standing still. South American producers have invested on the assumption that China will diversify away from US origin whenever politics raises US prices. So when US tariffs made soybeans pricier, Brazil scaled up. And when rumors of a thaw emerged, Brazilian premiums eased, locking in more sales. China reportedly snapped up around 20 cargoes of Brazilian beans recently on that price dip. That is what a market pivot looks like in real time. What changes from November 10th? Some US farm goods become cheaper for Chinese buyers as Beijing removes up to 15% in retaliatory duties. That's real relief for certain categories, a door opening wider. But on the core commodity, soybeans, the tariff friction endures. And at the razor-thin margins of bulk agriculture, a few percentage points decide winners and losers across oceans. There is another lever: time. Beijing's suspension of the extra 24% tariffs for 1 year creates a window. If that window stays open long enough, and if the remaining frictions shrink, US origin can claw back its share. But that future also hinges on confirmation of those headline purchase commitments. For Washington, the messaging is progress, backed by the optics of a leader-to-leader meeting. For Beijing, it's calibrated easing, with the option to tighten again if talks sour. For traders, it's watch the spreads. And for farmers, it is still a ledger problem. Sell at a discount or store and hope the policy math moves your way. Here's the Maple States bottom line. The suspense isn't whether tariffs move up or down on paper, it's whether those moves change the delivered cost into a Chinese crushing plant enough to flip tenders back to US origin. Today, with a 13% tariff still on American soybeans, Brazilian cargoes retain the edge. Lift that final barrier or shift the relative premiums, and the shipping lanes could tilt back. Until then, expect goodwill purchases to be the exception, not the rule. In the next few weeks, watch for 3 signals. 1. Large lot US bookings cleared for Chinese state buyers beyond COFCO. 2. A narrowing of the Brazil-US premium spread below that approximately $2.25 to $2.40 gap. 3. Any formal confirmation from Beijing matching the White House's multi-year tonnage claims. If those dominoes fall, you'll see it. Not on a podium, but in the port lineups. This is Maple States. If you value clear numbers over loud noise, stick with us. We'll track the tenders, the tariffs, and the truth. And tell me in the comments, is this a real reset or just a carefully staged pause while the market keeps choosing Brazil?